Hi, my name is Cassandra Nuñez, and today I'm going to talk to you about some surprising results we found during a study of weaning in domestic foals. And before I get started, I want to give a big shout out to Tamara Ford. She was an undergrad at Iowa State University who conducted all of this work, and she's now at the University of Missouri earning her veterinary degree. So typically, domestic foals are artificially weaned at around 4 to 7 months of age. And this is recognized as a source of stress that can have deleterious effects. Short-term effects, so those occurring in the first few days or weeks after weaning, include altered feeding and sleeping patterns, increased aggression, increased risk of injury, changes in heart rate, and also increased glucocorticoid levels, so hormones that can help animals cope with stressful situations. Long-term effects include a decreased immune response, delayed maturation of the gut microbiota, which can actually foster the establishment of more harmful bacteria such as E. coli, and also stereotypic behaviors that can actually affect learning ability later in life. And so what we wanted to know was, does the mare-foal relationship prior to weaning mitigate the foal stress response after weaning? So does mare-foal behavior or the dynamics between them before weaning affect foal behavioral and/or physiological stress responses after weaning? And to do this, we looked at 17 mare-foal pairs from June through October in 2018. And we looked at their activity budgets, the distance they kept between them, the foal suckling duration and rate, and also the mare versus foal suckling termination rate before weaning, to see if these behaviors or patterns affected foal self-grooming rates, vocalization rates, and fecal cortisol levels after weaning. Now for our behavior, we recorded mare-foal activity and mare-foal distance every 5 minutes. And we recorded things like nuzzling, suckling, self-grooming, and vocalizing ad libitum, so as they occurred. For our fecal sampling, we collected 133 fecal samples ad libitum, and we determined foal fecal cortisol metabolite levels via enzyme immunoassay. Now, to make a long story short, the mare-foal relationship prior to weaning did not mitigate the foal stress response after weaning. However, mare experience did seem to be important. So when we look at the number of foals that mares had over their lifetime and foal fecal cortisol levels after weaning, we see that foals born to mares with more experience exhibited lower cortisol levels than did foals born to mares with less experience. And we found this really exciting because although the behaviors we collected didn't seem to have any effect, mares with experience seem to be doing something different that we didn't, collect, that helps foals to cope with this stressful situation. We found that very exciting. We also found what seems to be a mismatch between foal behavioral stress indicators and their physiological stress indicators after weaning. So for example, when we look at self-grooming rates by foals before and after weaning, we see an increase in this behavior after weaning compared to before. It's exactly what we would have expected. Similarly, we see increases in their vocalization rates. Again, what we would have expected. But when we look at their cortisol levels, we see the opposite of what we expect. We'd see actually a significant decrease in their cortisol levels. So why this mismatch? Well, we don't think it has to do with our laboratory methods or the assay that we used, because when we look at mare cortisol levels, we see more of what we would have expected. Although it's a very slight difference, it's statistically not significant, but there is a slight increase in mare cortisol levels after weaning. Again, more of what we would expect. Now, there are a host of reasons of why we may have gotten this result. For one, cortisol is notoriously variable between individuals and also among species. And also, cortisol has a wealth of functions that don't have anything to do with the stress response in animals, so it's complicated. It's possible, though, that what we saw was an instance of hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis dysfunction in the foals after weaning. Now, that is a mouthful, so let me explain. The HPA axis normally looks like this. A stressor stimulates the hypothalamus to form corticotropin-releasing hormone, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to form adrenocorticotropic hormone, which then stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete cortisol. This is the hormone that, in most mammals, that helps them cope with stress. Now, as cortisol levels increase, a negative feedback mechanism suppresses the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary from further action, and so more cortisol is not produced. However, if the stressor continues, this entire process can break down so that even though the animal is experiencing stress, they're not producing higher cortisol levels. Now, this HPA axis dysfunction has been demonstrated in a wealth of taxa, everything from domestic pigs to spotted salamanders to wild baboons to newborn foals. And so it's possible that this is what we saw with our animals. And we'd like to say that though our results surprised us, we feel that they have really important complications for future research, both with domestic and wild animals. So, for example, given the foal's behavioral and physiological responses that we saw, artificial weaning at such a young age could be more deleterious to foals than previous studies have suggested. And perhaps more importantly, our research really demonstrates the importance of monitoring both behavioral and physiological indicators of stress when investigating animal welfare, again, in both domestic and wild species. Not doing so could lead to misleading results and a less holistic understanding of animal responses to potential stressors. And with that, I'd like to give special thanks to Nikki Furwada over at the ISU Horse Barns. We would not have been able to do this work without her. I'd like to thank our funding sources, the Animal Behavior Society, and the organizers for getting us together again this year, and to you for your attention today.